Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar on startup and spinoff nonprofit IT. I'm Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'm the moderator today.
My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO of Community IT.
We're going to go on to the second part of our presentation, which is probably what you all came for, best practices and how to avoid pitfalls. So, Johan, you want to start us off with best practices for startup ITs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 3 things we would encourage you to focus on are, number one, start managing your IT early on. And I think one way to do that, probably the best way to do that as a startup, is to think about the management of the IT as you roll it out. So you need to spin up a website. That's great. That isn't hard to do these days, depending on what you need from the website. You know, maybe you just get a Squarespace website right off the bat. But who's going to manage that over time? Who's going to keep it up to date? Who's going to manage the renewal? Are there future integrations that might be needed? How do those get managed? So as you say that again,
Keep it secure. Like who's going to?
How do you keep it
all
secure?
Of the people who have admin access to your website.
Exactly. So think about the management of the system. Same with equipment. You know, if you're gonna ask staff to use their own personal computers at this stage to do their work, how is that going to get managed? You know, how do you make sure that their machines are secure? That your information that the organization's information is safe on their machines. And if you're going to purchase machines for staff, how do those machines get managed? So, thinking back to the earlier slide, the management requirements at the startup phase, especially for small organizations with 5 people or less, aren't significant. So you may not run into these management challenges right away, but you will run into them eventually. And so it's really important to start thinking about that now. How is IT going to get managed? Who's going to own it? So it's really kind of the ownership and governance of IT it's important to keep in mind in this startup phase. Secondly, plan the IT you will need as you grow. So think about not just what you need today, but your timeline for growth. What do you need when you become 10 people a year from now? What if you're going to grow to 20 people 2 years from now? Are the IT decisions that you're making now going to work for the organization as it grows? And I think one of the biggest decisions that organizations have to make is whether or not to go with Google Workspace as their primary productivity solution, or to go with Microsoft 365 as their primary productivity solution. And we have a lot of great resources on our website, sort of comparing the two. There's plenty of resources out there that kind of will walk you through the implications of making that decision. But we have worked with organizations that, just kind of picked on a whim and then found themselves in both directions. There's no right answer here. It's really about fit for the organization. And so we've worked with organizations that, maybe weren't as intentional about that decision and then ended up having to switch and created a lot more work for themselves down the road. So that's just one example. There are others, but that's, kind of one of the primary ones that new organizations need to think about. And then finally, own your own IT as much as possible. So there's 2 examples that come to mind here. One is if you're, spinning off, if you're part of another organization and they're giving you access to their information systems, at some point when you become your own organization, you are going to, need to spin off and become your own organization. And the more independence you have earlier on, the more you own things like your domain name and your website earlier on, the less difficult it becomes down the road to go through that process. The other thing that we've seen is organizations that work with an IT support provider that will resell information storage systems. So when you're working with an MSP, they will provide you with the management tools. So they'll provide the systems that keep your machines secure. They might provide you with the antivirus. They might provide you with the automated patching solution. Those are all completely portable. And if you're working with us and switch to another MSP, all of our systems come off very easily, and the new MSP systems come on very easily. Those are easily moved around. Your files can be very difficult to move around. So if you end up getting your file storage solution from a managed services provider, and then you outgrow them and want to switch to somebody else, your files are on their system. How helpful, how accommodating are they going to be in you moving your files off of their system to another system? And if it's a strange system, if it's not a standard file management system, how is it even going to be possible? So I really caution organizations when you're working with an IT support provider, by all means, use their utilities. And those tend to be delivered more efficiently through an outsourced provider, but be very careful about having them host your email, your files. Any information that you want to take with you should be on systems that you own from the outset. Very closely related to that, and there's some similarities here between the last topic and this one on spin-off IT. There will be some detangling. It's not always possible for an organization while it's being incubated, or maybe it started as a program. It's just a program in a larger nonprofit organization. That program gets its own domain name, but the domain name's owned by the parent nonprofit. The email, the files, everything's part of the parent nonprofit. That happens, and that's fine. And at some point, the program, the organization decides for strategic reasons that it would be better if this program, this initiative, were its own nonprofit organization, and it's time to spin off. So that happens. It's not always possible to avoid that. But there is a detangling process that needs to take place, and that can be difficult, and it can be challenging depending on how accommodating the parent nonprofit is. If you're working, if you're spinning out of a very large nonprofit that has very formal, IT policies and procedures, you might not be able to do everything that you want to do. Like there may be added steps that you need to take to move your data to a system that you own. So get that process started early. Have an ally in the management of the organization you're spinning out of, who can advocate for you and help move certain decisions through. But start thinking about that process now if you're thinking about spinning out. Make sure you identify someone in your organization who's taking on the leadership role for the transition. Don't assume that your new IT support provider can own every aspect of that, because there's a lot of interfacing that needs to happen with the parent organization, and oftentimes they don't want to talk to the new provider. They're only willing to talk to the organization that's spinning out. And there's also change management that needs to happen within the spin out organization, and it's important to have somebody in the organization kind of taking the lead on that. So, and then finally, cloud is your friend. I mean, this is true almost universally these days, but it's so much easier to migrate systems that are hosted in the cloud rather than systems that are hosted on someone's server. And we're seeing a lot less of this these days, but it's important to keep that in mind as well.
But with the caveat, I think we've had a couple of organizations come to us, and I wouldn't try to do like a migration to a cloud provider and spin off and implement other new systems all at the same time. Like this is great where earlier you said start as early as possible. So if you know that you're going to be spinning off, you might want to, in a year or two, you might want to do a cloud migration to the cloud platform that you want to have as a spinoff. And then it'll make it easier for you to spin off later. So trying to do that organization of the timeline, I think, is always smart when you can. We also had, some questions about understanding your security needs as you change providers, as you spin off or are starting up. So I wanted to let you see, this is a framework that we use. It's looking a little bit odd on the Google Slides. Sorry about that. So the framework that we have, I'll put it in the chat. We have a playbook that we have on our site. That's a free download that goes into a lot of depth on how to handle cybersecurity as a nonprofit of any size. As Matt Eshelman, our cybersecurity expert, says, wire fraud is a crime that doesn't care how big or small you are. Everyone is a target. And so thinking early about cybersecurity basics is a good habit to get into, just as you're talking about managing all of your IT early, thinking of it as a strategic investment and being able to manage it. You also want to keep cybersecurity in mind. Even small organizations can fall victim to ransomware or wire fraud scams. There's a lot of basic tools like using multi-factor authentication and basic training for staff that you can do to help keep your organization protected. But cybersecurity can't protect you if you aren't doing it. Or if you're saving it for later because it kind of stresses you out and you're like hoping that you're going to be under the radar. Definitely take it seriously to begin with. There's lots of resources out there on being able to protect yourself, including our playbook, which I put in the chat. But Johan, is there anything specific for starting up or spinning off around cybersecurity, you would say, and just making sure that we save a little time for questions at the end? So.
Yeah, I think cybersecurity can be big, scary. Like, I've got so many other things I'm dealing with, getting this new organization off the ground. Now I have to become an expert in cybersecurity, and I've got to go and read all these resources and stuff. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, I think the most practical way to get started is to let your cyber liability insurance application be your guide. So if you're starting a new organization, you've got a lot of insurance policies that you have to set up, workers' compensation, general liability. Nowadays, cyber liability is going to be its own policy. The days of it being just baked into general liability, the days of it being just an easy one-page rider on general liability, those days are over. You're going to have to get, I'm almost certain, everyone we've talked to has had to get a separate, specific cyber liability insurance policy. And in order to qualify for cyber liability insurance, you now have to complete an application. And this is something that it's new. This has only been in the last few years. So that's a good starting point. That application is going to basically be an audit document, and it's going to tell you all the things that you need to do to qualify for cyber liability insurance. And I think if you do those things, you'll be in a good starting position as a new organization when it comes to your cybersecurity.
So we want to make sure that we hit on a couple of IT leadership tips. I think, Johan, you've kind of sprinkled several of them throughout our talk today, and just really focusing on even as a small organization, or maybe even especially as a small organization, like taking ownership of your IT management and making sure that that's a leadership position is important. So we're going to talk a little bit about an IT roadmap, which I just want to point out that we did an IT roadmap webinar recently that's on our site, so you can look at that in more depth. But we'll just add a few more tips for someone who's spinning off or starting to grow. So these are not trick questions either, Johan. So what is an IT roadmap?
Another thing that sounds complicated. Very simply, it's a list of initiatives, a list of things related to IT that the organization needs to do, organized based on priority. the urgency and the importance, as well as the impact that it's going to have on the organization.
And how can an IT roadmap help you in transitions?
It's very helpful because it ensures that the IT that you need is in place when you need it. So the IT roadmap can be aligned to your overall, the organization should have a spin out plan. So, we're doing this by this date, the formal separations on this date, we're signing the chartering documents on this date, we're opening a new office, et cetera. And you just want to have IT kind of baked into that. So if you have a larger organizational plan, then you can make sure that the roadmap is kind of aligned with that larger plan so that all of the IT systems are in place when you need them.
Can you make one yourself, or do you need IT consultants to make an IT roadmap?
You can probably make one yourself, and I would encourage, especially if you're a smaller organization, I would encourage you to at least get started trying to make one. And we have a sample on the next slide that we'll share with you. And then if you do run into problems, we typically recommend just, kind of thinking back to that early slide about the different types of support you can get: a power user in-house, an independent consultant, a small IT support shop, a full service managed services firm. Whoever you're working with to help you with your IT, they should be able to put the roadmap together for you, or at the very least, give you the information that you need to put your roadmap together. So you don't need to go out and find a special roadmap consultant to put the roadmap together.
That makes sense. And the next question, what do startups and spinoffs need from their IT roadmap? I think let's go ahead and show our example. So it can be something as simple as a spreadsheet, or even you could start with a Word document and then put it in a spreadsheet, or a lucid chart, some way that you can indicate like when things are going to happen, who's responsible for them, and what the priorities are, what the urgency is. So did you want to talk a little bit about this example and how, for a spinoff, particularly, this might be really useful.
Yeah. I mean, this, again, like you just kind of brainstorm and think through like, well, our staff are going to need laptops to do their work. We're going to open an office and we need a wireless network for them to connect to. Based on our cybersecurity application, we're going to need to provide multi-factor authentication and set up single sign-on. These are best practice policies for organizations to have, and especially for smaller, newer organizations, they can just be developed as part of the overall, employee handbook, HR policies, organizational policies that are being put together. You may know that you need to migrate files from the parent organization. So basically, you're collecting like all of the different, from these various sources, the things that you're going to need to do as far as IT goes, and then just sort of ranking them. And I think the other thing you can do, which we didn't do here, is also kind of put them on a timeline, like almost have like a light Gantt chart, kind of listing when these things are going to happen and establishing any dependencies between them. It can really fit into a project management framework. So hopefully, like you have whoever's responsible for this whole transition that you're going through, you've got someone good doing the project management, and they can really just kind of like slot in the IT component here.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just going to add, like putting on it who's responsible, like who is the person that, like, not only when it has to happen in order for your transition to happen, but who is the responsible person, and then making sure that they have all of the resources that they need, time and staff and support, leadership support to, kind of tell people what needs to happen and why you're doing it and how it's going to help the IT work after the spinoff is important. So we have a little bit of time for some Q&A. If you want to put in a question for Johan, he's going to have some time to answer. We do have a couple from our registration, so I'm just going to turn to one of those. One was, do you have recommendations for laptop inventory? So as part of this process.
I wish I did. That is something that we're still trying to figure out. I do think for smaller organizations, just a simple spreadsheet works just fine. The name of the computer, the serial number, and the person that it's assigned to. For larger organizations, if you have an asset management system, if the finance team is going to use like a formal asset management system, we recommend, including the IT equipment on that. There's a number of different solutions that we've been testing, web-based solutions for managing inventory that we're not ready to make a recommendation yet. So it's kind of unfortunately, it's an open issue, just kind of in the sector. But for smaller organizations, spreadsheets can be very effective.
And you do need to manage your inventory.
You do need to manage your inventory.
That question.
Yeah, in fact, I'll just quickly mention that there's two different aspects to inventory management. There's the who's logged into the computer and who physically has the computer. And sometimes those are the same people, but those are two different questions that you're answering. So a good device management solution, which your IT provider should be providing for you, you can get, you don't need that right away, but when you get to the 15 to 20 person size range, you need a good device management platform. That system can tell you, this is a computer that we own, and here's the last person who logged into it. What that system can't tell you is, here's who our facilities manager gave that laptop to, and here's where they live and where they took the laptop to. And this has become a real challenge in the modern world, in the contemporary world, because of work from home. So the best thing to do is have two systems, one that's a facilities-based system where you have inventory control and you record this device was given to this person and they're at this location. And then you can always match that up with your device management system that tells you, yeah, that aligns with this user logged into this device, and that is consistent with what the inventory management system is telling us. So it's really it's important to have sort of a double ledger, if you will, of equipment for inventory management purposes.
And I feel like that's another piece that as you grow becomes more important, and also, budgeting and planning for replacing that inventory. And, when you're a small startup and you only have, 3 or 4 staff members, and you all have your own laptop and you just bring it and work on it. But as you grow, you're going to want to be replacing those at a regular interval so that you have them up to date and they can receive all the security updates and all of that. So starting early with an inventory, I feel like we do have some clients who come to us who are we don't even know all of the devices that are out there or who's on them. So it's a good habit to get into. My next question is, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I know that there's no answer to this, but someone in the registration did ask about costs. So when you are looking at managed service provider or other, IT support, how do costs usually work? Is it per staff person? Is it per device? Are there other costs that go into it? How can people kind of get an idea of what that's going to be like?
Yeah, I mean, the two most common sort of ways of pricing out IT support services are per hour or per device or per person. So independent consultants and smaller break-fix shops will typically bill you on a per hour basis, and their staff just have an hourly rate associated with their work. Managed services providers will usually combine hourly rate work with a per device fixed price. So a fixed price for managing the devices, potentially supporting the staff that use those devices, and that'll either be per device or sometimes they'll do it on a per person basis as well.
All right, so that's good to know. I want to be mindful of time. So we had some learning objectives today, and I think we've gone over them. I think we've hit all of them. So we wanted to learn typical IT concerns for startups and spin-off nonprofits. We wanted to learn best practices as you go off on your own or as you grow, just in general. We wanted to understand evolving security needs and give you some resources to go to for security, and then learn a few IT leadership tips for kind of guiding your organization through these types of transitions. So, Johan, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I feel like this was really very useful. I hope it was useful to people who are spinning off or are managing their startup nonprofits. And thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And Johan, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.